This is Ron Peters.
I'm John Nugent.
And I'm Sam Long.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class. Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. For us, it's been a whirlwind of conferences and conventions. We were at the North. I can get it together. We're at the Stone Campbell Journal Conference last weekend. We have the Michigan Christian Convention on campus this weekend.
Yep.
So, takeaways, thoughts of all that?
It's really screwing up our schedule.
Yes, it sure
We've
is.
had so much trouble trying to come up with times to record. You know, the listener doesn't realize this is Saturday morning. We don't come into the office on Saturdays.
No.
And so for us to come into the office on a Saturday to get this recording in is it's a statement about our commitment. Commitment to the listener.
It's
to make sure
a statement about something.
In all fairness, you both came in yesterday to record. And
I wasn't going to bring that up. But
I had forgotten our Friday morning early morning recording.
Sam and I are sitting here. We're like, is John showing up? John's showing up. Finally sent him a text. He's like, crap, I forgot. But we've all been there. We've all forgotten things. So,
but the Stone Campbell Journal Conference is special to this podcast.
It is.
Because it was there 7 years ago that the podcast was born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember bringing that up. We've talked about this every year, but why not talk about it again? I just remember having the idea for doing a podcast, and like 5 minutes after the idea came into my head, it was, why not do it with somebody else, specifically you and Sam? So I go to Sam, go to John. What do you guys think about this podcast? And the next thing you know, it's what we're talking about, the whole trip at the SCJ conference, on the drive back. And from that conversation, 6 years of podcasting have been born.
Yeah, I was in a different van on the way home, so I was just getting texts.
Oh, yeah, that's
like,
right.
PH3 was the early on winner for name. We didn't call it that, unfortunately. But
Still love it.
Yeah.
Still love the name. But after classes worked very well. I'm not complaining, but I still want to find something to do with PH3.
Yeah. So it was interesting. I was kind of oblivious to it. I was focused on not crashing, but we got home and apparently there was a podcast. So
yeah. So another couple of weeks we'll have the anniversary of the actual first episode. We'll acknowledge that when it comes around. But yeah, it's a big deal for us.
Yeah. And now that everyone's here on campus for the convention, there's lots of alumni here.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually talking to a couple of missionaries who graduated from Great Lakes and are now overseas, and they were talking about, there's this like crowd of people that they know who are all listeners to the podcast in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. Wow.
Like, really?
Okay.
The whole group of them in Sri Lanka that all like listen to it and then get together and talk about it. And so
that's great. So yeah, thank you, Laminda. Thank you, Denise, and to everybody in Sri Lanka who listens. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Not sure we'd have an international impact, but apparently
I didn't know we have any impact outside our families. But
I know, right?
Right.
Well, I still like to tell people, now we can add Sri Lanka to places around the world. We've said New Zealand. We've said Australia, people we've heard from over there. So, and the gal who you and I met a couple weeks ago, where'd she come from? Was it Belgium?
I believe so.
Yeah, so Belgium, listeners over in Belgium.
Yeah, a woman about 80 years old, right?
Yeah.
Right around 80, and she made this trip up, to the States, and she went out of her way to come to Lansing, Michigan to meet some of the podcast people. And
so, wow.
So, yeah, John, I
didn't get the invite.
Yeah, you were
That's
out of
fine.
town.
Oh, sure.
You're throwing that disc around.
Yeah.
I want to talk to Ron and Sam, or Ron and John, but not that Sam.
Yeah, that's fine. Most people feel that way.
No, it's usually the other way around. I'm the one they're usually like, don't bring Ryan there.
So in the context of having guests on campus and talking, apparently one of our listeners was confused. I have to clarify, because at one of the sessions, Mark Christian said that words matter. And apparently I said last week when I was talking about my monocle, by which I mean my single contact lens that I use for reading instead of reading glasses, I said that I had it installed, which gave the impression that it's like a permanent thing in my eye. Not true. These are disposable. Put them in every morning, take them out every night. So in case you were confused by that as well and contemplating the installation of a reading lens.
You're a cyborg. It's fine.
Don't do
that's
it.
what
Don't
I've
do
been
it.
imagining. This major surgery. You've got this kind of thing on your eye that makes you look at Borg or something like that. And so
and other people tell me there's actually surgeries out there that people are actually starting to mess with that actually impact reading glasses, which is I don't know if they're true or just rumors or they're confusing it with other laser surgeries. But I was told there's no laser surgery to fix the need for reading glasses.
that sounds right. It's a different thing.
From your professional opinion, as
Exactly.
Right.
Dr. Peters, the eye
Optometrist.
specialist over here. Yeah, that sounds right.
yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, it's been a busy week. And Wednesday we had our senior seminars. That's
Yeah.
why we
Oh,
couldn't
that's right,
record
yeah.
on Wednesday. So it's kind of like the capstone assignment for our graduates is
Right.
this significant paper that integrates their Bible theology major with their specific vocational major and kind of brings them together for a pretty lengthy paper, and then
Yeah.
has some pretty formal presentations that we invite people on campus for. And so that was all day on Wednesday, which kept us from
Yeah.
recording. And they did a good job. I sat in a few of them, and I really appreciated what they had to say.
Yeah, same here. We had 20 students present that day, and so it was just 9 till 6 at night. I was tired at the end of it. I can tell you
It's
that.
a long
Yeah.
day.
It was a long day, but no, I heard some really good papers. Jason McFarland's paper was really good. I'm excited for what he's trying to do over in India when he goes back home. Um, uh, Hezekiah Trevino's paper on diversity in the church, the challenges of diversity in the church, was also really good. I thought it was really thoughtful and informative.
Yep.
So shout out to both of those guys.
Yep. And Alyssa Allen knocked it out of the park. Also happens to be my daughter.
Right.
But no, she did one on how churches can have a more robust ministry by addressing the needs of single mothers.
Oh, good.
And so it was actually kind of convicting, the amount of turmoil in the life of a single mother and the needs that they have are met so well by a healthy, functioning church family.
Amen. Yeah.
And so anyway, shout out to Alyssa as well. And my son-in-law Kai did a great one on ministerial burnout. And I mean, just great diversity of themes and students bringing their A game. So we appreciate that.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we're back to our series. I don't think anyone did a session on creation care. Is that right?
I
did
believe
not
you're
see
right.
any of it.
I have not.
Yeah.
That doesn't even sound
So-
close to anything.
So that gap remains to be filled, and we're trying to do it with
And
this
here we are.
podcast. So
Right.
last week we kind of had a united theme in some of the prophets where we talked about there's oracles about earthly devastation, right?
yep.
And which seems to be in contrast with a little bit with God's promise in Genesis that he would never again ravage the earth on account of human sin. And so we wrestled with, how to treat a metaphor like a metaphor and
Right.
and part of the reasons why, we're led to think that these are metaphorical ways of talking about a new state of affairs on earth when old regimes are moved out and new regimes are brought in, is because there's this scriptural witness that talks about the hope for the future of creation.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to those this week. But before we get to that, there are at least three passages, a couple in Jeremiah, one in Hosea, that just talk about the negative impact human sinfulness has on the land. And
Right.
that's an important backdrop for thinking about the hopeful passages that we're going to end with. So, Sam, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we start in Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 7. It says, I brought you into a plentiful land to eat its fruits and its good things. But when you entered, you defiled my land and made my heritage an abomination. And so the idea is God was with them and gave them all they needed and this wonderful thing. And what did they do with it? They crashed the car, right?
Right. Yeah.
and because of their sinfulness, and of course the context, of course, would be not keeping Torah, but specifically, using the word abomination has to do with breaking covenant expectations, and so they ruined the land with it, which is kind of an interesting thing. Where
Yep.
it's one. So thinking about how does, for example, I don't know. Not returning an ox when he goes astray, how does that contribute to the land? And maybe not a direct thing, but for Jeremiah, it's all connected. How they interact with their neighbor, how they interact with the land. You can't just sort of separate them out.
Yeah. I think there's a sense of, not returning the ox to your neighbor. It's representative of a deeper disposition that people have of not really being concerned with other people. It's like I find an ox. It's like, great, look at what I've got. I've got a new ox. Yay. Well, that's a very selfish way of looking at it. Instead of saying this ox belongs to somebody, I need to find out who that person is and get it back. That's going to spill over into your relationship with the land. Is the land something you're going to exploit for your own good? Or are you going to love the land the way God does? And so take care of it in a way that you get the benefit, but also looks out for the good of the land.
Yeah. There are other points we made about this, but let's
Sure.
get the next two passages out there,
Why not?
Okay.
and then we'll kind of talk about the theme altogether.
The next one is Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 4. The prophet asks, "How long will the land mourn, and the grass of every field wither? For the wickedness of those who live in it, the animals and birds are swept away. And because people said, 'He is blind to our ways,'" he being God, I believe.
Yep. Yeah. He doesn't see what's going on.
Right.
Probably.
We can do whatever we want because he's oblivious.
Yep. And then Hosea 4, 1 through 3. Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel, for the Lord has an indictment against the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or loyalty, and no knowledge of God in the land. Swearing, lying, and murder, and stealing and adultery break out. Bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and all who live in it languish, together with the wild animals and the birds of the air. Even the fish of the sea are perishing.
Oh, wow. You can just see, I can see the sea with all these, like the Sea of Galilee or something like that. All these fish are just floating on the top because of people's sin. Wow, this must be a really bad land.
Yeah, what's going on in these passages, especially that last one? Like, people are people are in houses late at night, sneaking out, sleeping with other people's spouses, and the fish are languishing. Like, what? How do we? Is there a cause and effect relationship to marine life and what people are doing in the comfort of their homes?
Well, I think what Hosea says is he frames it when he talks about inhabitants of the land and there's no knowledge of God in the land. And then he says, therefore the land mourns. And there's this connection of land and people and purpose that we need to be careful not to overlook. That when and in the first Jeremiah passage, he called it his heritage, right? And so for God, this is an important thing. It's not as important as it's made in modern days in a different way, but this idea of like, this is where I'm putting you. This is the blessing you're receiving, so you can become this thing, this people, this kingdom of priests, and so you're taking the sort of part of the vehicle by which you're going to become that, and you're destroying it. And I'm trying to think of a parallel, and I'll keep thinking while you all talk about it.
Well, I just think, thinking in terms of broad strokes, it just goes back to what we said many times, that sin has far-reaching effects, and it affects the land. And these are just passages that reinforce that. We've seen it all along, and so it extends into the prophets. I'm still thinking about it because you're talking about how it extends to the fish. Like, how does it go from the land to
Yeah.
the water?
Sure.
Is it like runoff? Is it like, farmers have to be careful. Like modern farmers worry about using too much nitrogen, because the nitrogen, if you use too much, will run off into like water sources and wreak havoc out there. And so it's making me think of like excess nitrogen from farms causing havoc in streams and rivers. It's a very imprecise metaphor, but it kind of makes me think of that.
Yeah. It makes me think a lot about, what we saw in the early chapters of Genesis. Like, especially how sin, like the first sin was a conspiracy between humans and the animal kingdom and the land, the tree in this case. And it has consequences for the humans and the serpent's offspring and the soil, right? Like there's this theme of it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And then when the punishment of the flood comes, like the whole land is impacted. Like, and I think what the prophets are doing and what Torah is doing is kind of giving us a God's eye perspective.
Yeah.
For us, we are modern people who separate spheres out, and we're very precise about whether this impacts that. And we're talking about causality. What is the causation between adultery in someone's house and fish in the water? And that's just a human way of like separating what God views as a whole. Like for him, like he has this vision for creation where humans are thriving and being good stewards of the land and the seas and the animals and creatures of the earth, and they're filling the earth and multiplying, and they're caring for the soil and how they farm and for the forests and how they wage wars and and for him it's just all connected. And when one major part of it, which is the witness of his people living out Torah, is not working, he looks down and he mourns for the whole package. Because they're connected, even if there's not a like literal cause and effect relationship between adultery in a house and fish in the sea. For God, he sees a connection.
Yeah.
And the prophets are kind of giving us a God's eye view. And that connection doesn't have to be literal,
Mhm.
right? And we know in modern day how human abuse of natural resources does pollute the waters, right?
Yeah.
And pollutes the ozone. We know about that. That's probably not, but to fixate on that maybe misses the profoundness of this passage.
Sure.
That in God's view, we are so connected that even things that aren't causally connected are connected in God's view.
Yeah. Well, it's a cascade effect is what it is. People understand what a cascade is. It's like a cascade is when one thing sets into motion several other things. Think about like dominoes and you like knocking down dominoes and these kind of, making like pictures where as the dominoes fall over, they're knocking down other dominoes and creating these kind of cool images. But that's a cascade. And God's saying, okay, maybe as you said, maybe it's not literally your sins in the house are affecting the fish. I see it as all interconnected. It's a cascade effect. And so if we don't understand the fact that our sin has these far-reaching implications, we're not going to fully appreciate how devastating it can be. So yeah, again, maybe not direct cause and effect, but it doesn't mean they're unrelated.
And I don't want to negate the cascading effect, because I think that's right, and we have evidence of that. But even like totally severing wow,
Saturday morning.
severing the relationship between adultery in the house and fish in the sea, like from God's perspective, if his people are not living righteous, holy lives, the fish aren't happy. You know what I'm saying? It could have no effect on fish population, fish food control, the quality of water,
Right.
but still, the fish were meant to be a part of a creation where humans are living in ways that glorify God.
Right, exactly.
And we're his set apart. And like, even though they seem to be thriving, it's kind of like if the rich are in their house thriving and drinking wine. We see this in the prophets, and they're having parties, they're enjoying their wealth. But like, 2 doors down, someone is going hungry. God looks down at his creation and said, all of it's messed up. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, for a big part of his creation plan, the mission of a set apart people living out Torah, if that's not firing on all cylinders, the rest of it, though it appears to be unfazed by it, is out of whack, out of balance, out of the harmony that God created with creation.
Yeah.
And it mourns and languishes with it.
And this is not new. It shouldn't have been new to them. When you read, for example, Deuteronomy, and it talks about the blessings and cursings, it talks about the land, about it doing well when you keep Torah, and and also not doing well when you don't. And so, and the prophets are not making up something and like making connections that aren't there. This is from the beginning, where God says it's all, like you said, the word connection is right on, because that's exactly right. And we don't view it in that way, but it definitely is. So many things about the Old Testament and how they viewed their life was about connectedness, and we are so disconnected from each other, from creation, from God, and we just don't see it. We don't see, like, we assume everything's about us. Well, it's only hurting me. It's only right if I commit this sin.
Yeah.
Right.
If I get high, I'm just the only one getting high. Well, okay, in your mind that's it, but there's more at play, right?
Yep.
And so that connectedness idea, if we could just get over our self-absorption, we would see there's a lot more going on than just that.
Yeah.
And we don't see it unless, like, someone says, "Oh, if I get drunk and drive, who's that affect?" Well, it could affect a lot of things,
Right.
and we see that, like, well, no, you shouldn't do that. But then other things where there's not a clear result or a clear cascading situation, butterfly effect, if you will.
Right, exactly.
Then we just dismiss it as not being a thing, which what God says, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
Yeah. His view is just different. I don't want to use the word mystical, but there is an invisible connectedness to it all that we can't see, that just seems to be the way God perceives the whole thing. And I loved your example there, Sam. It reminded me of Jesus' teaching about like adultery. And it's like, no, if you're looking after someone lustfully, right? If you're committing adultery in your heart, it's impacting everything.
Yeah.
In a way that we're like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Because you can't point to me in a cause and effect relationship with these thoughts in my head to me harming someone else's life.
Right.
And that just shows that's a very human way of viewing things.
For the one or two people out there who understand anything about physics, it makes me think of quantum entanglement. So quantum entanglement, see, right?
Beat me to it.
But it's something that happens at a subatomic level that physicists have observed that they can't explain, where like you affect, this subatomic particle over here, and literally light years away, there's an effect. And it's like they're not connected. There's no connection between them. And yet there's a cause and effect here that we can't explain. And I don't know, it just made me think of that little physics thing. So like I said, for the one or two people out there who care about that, throwing that bone out to you.
Very, very good. I'm not among those.
Cool.
I know, right? Somebody send me an email saying thank you. I want to feel good.
Or don't, and don't encourage him. Either one of those is fine, preferably mine.
So now we're going to transition to really what the rest of the prophets have to say about creation, and that is, as the prophets envision the future God is bringing, and the new thing He wants to do. He's not going to just talk about it as the salvation of the souls of His chosen people. He's going to talk about this holistic, interconnected thing being restored. So we have several passages for this. And
Sure, we'll flip over back to Isaiah 55, starting in verse 12. For you shall go out with joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. And it shall be to the Lord for memorial, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. It was hard for me to read that because there's a song
I know,
that's going in my head,
I know,
and the words are slightly different.
Well, and that song has it has a very kind of Jewish
Yes.
feel to it, the way the music is. And so, yeah, as soon as you start reading it, that song was just locked into my brain.
But anyway, this is I love this passage because it's doing a couple of things. It starts by almost framing a new Exodus. The idea is that the people have gone into exile and now they're coming back, and so they're going to go out from their exile with joy. They're going to go back in peace, and as they do, the creation around them is celebrating, right? It's a clapping and all those things, and then the specific implication of they have defiled the creation, right? And been exiled, and in that defilement, they're not getting the growth they would expect. They're getting thorns and thistles and briars, going all the way back to Genesis 3, right?
Yep.
And so he says, now that's being reversed. So instead of a thorn, you're getting a pretty big cypress tree, right?
Yeah, right.
And instead of a little briar thing, you're getting a nice looking myrtle. And the idea is God is reversing some of the effects of sin in the world because of their return. And so He's casting a vision of something better.
Yeah, and it's something we see in a lot of prophecies, and we see it in the New Testament as well. A specific message is given to a specific audience about their restoration from the particular, in this case, exile that they're encountering. And when you talk about that restoration, you can leap backward to the fall. With the origin of thorns and thistles and difficult farming, and then you can also leap forward to the fullness of the kingdom when that curse from Genesis is reversed, right, in the new heavens and new earth. And this temporary, very specific, concrete deliverance from exile is participating in that global drama from curse to full restoration. And this is participating, it's like a foretaste or a down payment, right, on the full restoration to come. And it's like Genesis is being reversed. And that's a kind of a cool theme. And we shouldn't fixate on the fact that, so when they came back from exile, literally when they reached the land of Israel again, did thorns go away?
Yeah.
No. Again, this
Right.
God's eye picture. This is about salvation history. God's ultimate purpose for creation, to overcome its being thwarted in the beginning through His set-apart people, is salvation history is moving forward because God's people are being restored. And when they're restored, we're one inch closer to the Messiah, 1 inch closer to the kingdom, 1 inch closer to creation's consummation. And it's all connected.
The next one is a passage that I love a lot. I frequently refer to it when talking to my students about resurrection and the Old Testament connections to God's ultimate plan for His creation. It's Isaiah 65, verses 17 through 25. I'm not going to read all of it, but I want to hit some highlights on it because it begins by God saying, I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I am about to create Jerusalem as a joy and its people as a delight. And he just goes through and he lists out all the things that are going to happen. There's going to be rejoicing. There will not be infant mortality. The old person who does not live out a lifetime is going to be a weirdo. The person who dies at 100 years will be considered a youth. All these blessed things are going to accompany it. The fruitfulness of the land is going to be the things that the people are going to enjoy. I like verse 25, though, because it kind of comes full circle to what we're talking about here.
Yep.
It says, the wolf and the lamb shall feed together. The lion shall eat straw like an ox. But the serpent, its food will be dust. That's kind of a funny one to me. They shall not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountains, says the Lord. And I think it does. It speaks to God's ultimate plan, that he's looking down at a broken world that is still languishing under the consequences of sin. And he's like, I'm going to fix it. And that's a beautiful picture, because really only God can fix it. I think we're living in a world where human beings are still trying to fix the brokenness of this world with, marginal success at best. But the absolute fix, to where everything is set to right, that's something really only the Creator can do. And his promise is, I am going to do it. And I want to be a part of that. I want to live a life that's, that sets me up to be a part of that new heaven and new earth experience.
Yeah. I think it's important that this chapter 65 is a part of a section of Isaiah 56 to 66, which addresses the post-exilic situation. So like the previous passage, is like while they're in exile and it's hope of returning, right? And then this passage is transition to, all right, you're back in the land. Things should be great, but they're not totally great.
Right.
Persia's still in control, right? There's a lot not right with Israel. There's division and in-house fighting, and they're just, and this is a message of hope. Like, yeah, I know the return isn't everything you hoped it would be, but again, this is a foretaste of this greater thing I'm doing.
Yeah.
And yes, all the effects of the fall will be reversed. And so I think, we have like predatory animals, feeding together, not eating each other, and they're eating straw the way God made it to be, where like humans and animals are eating the fruit of the land and not each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, the serpent's food being dust, it's kind of like, it's like God saying, and I won't allow, a serpent-like conspiracy with humans to ruin this whole thing all over again.
Yeah.
Like the force that kind of was a catalyst for
Right.
the fall will remain contained, so that we don't just relapse into the way it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I think it's important in part of this, in 21, they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. And so, our relationship with the land and the connection with the crops is going to be restored. There's going to be justice. Everyone will have enough to eat. They'll have their own land. And there is a harmony and an order. And I think it's important to just point out these very earthly parts of the future hope of Israel, because these are part of the reasons why when we look at these other verses about the whole earth will be utterly laid waste. And some people think that, okay, the earth's going to be chucked and we're all going to become spirits that float into the heavenly realm to enjoy our salvation. No, the hope here is planting and harvesting and eating. There are animals that are also eating and being near each other without consuming each other. It's a very earthly hope.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's passages like this that are also in the Isaiah corpus that maybe should keep us from looking at these other Isaiah passages that have metaphors of earthly destruction and say that was just metaphorical.
Right.
The hope here is very earthly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just turning another chapter away, Isaiah 66.
One column.
Exactly.
Verses 1 and 2. And thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne, and earth is my footstool. So what kind of house could you build for me? What sort of place for me to rest? All these things my hand has made, so all these things are mine. This just affirms what we saw in Torah. God looks at the earth and says, it belongs to me. It's my possession. So even though humans have been given dominion over the creatures of the earth, and even though they've been given permission to kind of subdue the land and occupy it and make it habitable, it remains God's. He still looks after it, owns it, makes a claim on it, and then that means that our dominion, our subduing, has limits imposed on it by God.
Right. Well, I think it's an important way for all of us. Israel is supposed to look at themselves as tenants, not the permanent owners, but we are the tenants on God's land. And I think that's true to this very day. for any of us who own land, we can't look at it as this is mine, and I have to remind myself of that, as a family who has, a lot of land. It's very tempting to hold on to it, like to have this sort of, protective attitude. And it's something I have to pray about on a regular basis to say, God, thank you for the land, but help me to always remember you own it. It is yours to do with as you please. Help me to honor you by treating the land that way.
Yeah, I don't know, it's weird, the footstool imagery. It's just,
Yeah.
again, going back to how self-absorbed and we think we're so great and we're the
Yeah.
pinnacle of creation and Earth is the greatest thing ever. It's God's footstool, man. Come
I
on.
know, right?
I mean, it is amazing. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
want to deny that, but like, put it in perspective. That's all. We move on to out of Isaiah finally. I know we weren't that much in Isaiah, but he has a lot to say. To Joel, which isn't, a lot of people don't spend much time in Joel for various reasons. And this is a very interesting passage I'm going to read. It's in Joel chapter 2, and it begins in verse 21. And it says, "Do not fear, O soil," which I think is a fascinating way to start. Like, why is the ground scared? We'll get to it. It says, "Be glad and rejoice, for the Lord has done great things. Do not fear, you animals of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness are green. The tree bears its fruit, the fig tree, the vine give their full yield. O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain, the early, the latter rain, as before. The threshing floor shall be full of grain, the vat shall overflow with wine and oil." And I got more to read, and so that's all setting up what comes next, because you understand what Joel is doing. There's things going on that come out here in verse 25. So why should the ground be scared? Why should the animals be afraid? Well, look at verse 25. "I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, the cutter, my great army which I sent against you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other, and my people shall never again be put to shame." And so what Joel does is he uses this locust imagery probably to talk about an invading army, Assyrians, Babylonians. I mean, we could go on and on. That depending upon when you date Joel, and where the idea is that the locusts came in and just ravished everything, like locusts do.
Right.
If you've ever
Yeah.
seen they can clear in no time. And so he has this great imagery of the locusts being actually the army that has done this to the people and to the land, seemingly. Which we've talked about this before. When armies come in, they'll take whatever they can get, either to make siege
Yep.
works, to have food, and so you almost get the impression that as they go through and keep moving through the land, they're leaving behind them just a swath of devastation. That there is no, like, the land is completely just wiped out. And he says, but don't worry, like, I know that happened, but it's not always gonna be like that. And I'm gonna come back. It's great picture of restoration, right? Where the pastures are green, everything's bearing its fruit. I'm gonna pour down all the rain you're going to need. And again, in a place where there's not a lot of rain, that's a
Right.
big
Yeah.
deal. And so this is a really cool picture of restoration after punishment, after the shame that came from their sinfulness that we've talked about already.
Yeah. Arguably, the whole book of Joel, which is not as long as a book like Isaiah, right, is about the judgment of God and the judgment of humans, and the metaphor all throughout is creational.
Yeah.
It's critters and crops.
Critters
That's
and
I love
that's emblematic of God's judgment upon the people of the land and what armies do to the land and
Mhm.
what grasshoppers do, or at least locusts do to the land, and all of it wreaks such havoc and devastation, and God's deliverance means the undoing of all that
Yep.
and the thriving of humans. And it's interesting to me that verse 27, "You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other." When we talk about God's presence being in our midst, we often jump immediately to a worship service,
Mhm.
because that's
Yeah,
when
right.
when we most use God's presence language. It
Yeah.
seems
Yeah.
right. And at the convention, the worship leader was telling us, God's in this house, right? Welcome God into our midst, right? But like here, it's like you're going to be eating awesome food. God is in your midst, right?
Right,
Like
yeah.
the context is the thriving of people and crops, and people are eating a bountiful feast because God is in their midst.
Yeah.
Like His presence is a sign of economic thriving for all, and not necessarily an occasion for a worship service.
Yeah. And I want to take away from what they're talking about, experiencing God in the midst when people are worshiping together. That's great. But I know that for me, some of the most awesome prayer times I have are away from people and away from the city, like being out in the woods and being close to God's creation. It's like all of a sudden I just have this incredible urge to talk to God. And passages like that are really exciting to me because it's like, yeah, that's a legitimate thing as well. Like I said, not trying to delegitimize the worship service, but getting away from what humanity has created and just being surrounded by God's creation is a very inspiring environment to be in.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not trying to, yeah, like you're saying, I'm not trying to detract from where God's presence is.
Right.
His creatures want to worship. But if you do a study of Scripture and the theme of God's presence, it's associated with a lot more than worship services.
Mm-hmm.
It's about God's presence means all humanity is thriving in the way God originally intended it to be thriving.
Amen. Yeah.
So there are social and political implications.
Sounds like you're advocating worshiping alone on a mountain instead of going to church. Is what all I hear. Just kidding.
I would be okay with that, but I'm kind of weird that way. Yeah.
I'm thinking about a feast at a table with Abraham and Isaac and the gang.
I'm feeling kind of very Elijah-like after priest.
Yeah.
victory.
Let me also apologize to the podcast. Apparently, I skipped a verse, pulled a
That's
Ron,
okay.
we call it.
Ron and I both caught it. We
Yeah,
we
good
made
work.
eye contact with each other.
Good
but-
work, guys. My bad.
Yeah, that's okay. You know what? We cover for each other. It's what we do. And so, hopping backwards a little bit to Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 47, Ezekiel has this vision of the temple, kind of dominates the end of his book here. Excuse me. In Ezekiel 47, beginning of verse 6, he hears mortal. I think it's literally son of man, if I remember right. That's kind of an interesting thing there.
Yep.
Have you seen this? Then he led me back along the bank of the river. As I came back, I saw on the bank of the river a great many trees on the one side and on the other. He said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah. And when it enters the sea of stagnant waters, the water will become fresh. Wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live. And there will be many fish once these waters reach there. It will become fresh, and everything will live where the river goes. People will stand fishing beside the sea, from Engedi to oh man, I almost said, I hit that word. I'm like, oh, I don't know how to pronounce that one. Eneglaim. I don't think I said that right. Anyway, continuing on. It will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of a great many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They are to be left for salt. On its banks on both sides of the river there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail. But they will bear fresh fruit every month, because of the water that flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. And so that's
En Eglaim. I
thank
think is what
you.
you're looking for.
And Eglaim. Yeah, I was stumbling over that in a big way. Thank you, Sam.
Go ahead. Now the actual things that matter. What the passage is
Exactly right. But this is a great vision, again, of God's healing power for the land. And so this fresh water that's going to go out, that's going to be able to water the land, fish are going to flourish, you're going to have lots of flourishing plants. And the great thing about God's healing power is that everybody gets the benefit of it.
Yeah.
Because these are fruiting trees. Animals will get to eat the fruit of the trees. People will get to eat the fruit of the trees. And so the great thing about, embracing God's vision for his creation is that it's not a selfish thing, but you see this holistic benefit that affects the water, the fish, the plants, and even the people. I love this vision. It's a great vision.
Yeah. It's kind of Ezekiel's version of the new heavens and new earth, right? And for him, the governing metaphor is temple, with this river flowing out of it.
Specifically that river, which I think is fascinating. But sorry, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. But again, this is temple, which we associate with God's presence, worship services, right? But like for them, like, no, temple is associated with river. River is associated with providing rich soil all along its banks so that there are fruitful trees and flowing with fish. And, God's presence and God's blessing means food and thriving creation and humans and nature and God, all three together that were alienated from one another because of the curse of sin, are brought together in this temple vision.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of, the peas that you talk about, Sam, a people, a place, with a privilege, but a purpose. And, don't over literalize this. Don't imagine like a building with water coming out of it. But if you understand that the temple represents, God's dwelling among his people, and this dwelling brings this benefit, this is still something that we're supposed to represent to the world, that our relationship with God, our service to God, not as just individuals, but as a people, should bring blessing that affects the land, the plants, the animals, and the people. And people should look at that and just go, I want to be a part of it. And so see this vision as something we are supposed to be manifesting right now, as well as a vision towards God's ultimate consummation for the world and everything in it.
Yeah. And it's a good point of not to over literalize it, because like this same vision is renewed in Revelation, but instead of it all revolving around a temple, it's like a new Jerusalem,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But you still have the tree of life and, and the agricultural land implications and God's presence among the city. And so, yeah, the vision takes different forms: new heavens, new earth in one place, new Jerusalem in another place, a new temple with a river in another place.
Right.
They're all pointing to the same direction, which is a reversal of the negative consequences of the fall and the fullness of God's original intentions for creation.
Yep.
We shouldn't take one image and make that the one and only image, and we shouldn't necessarily harmonize all three into like a hybrid synthetic image.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But we should catch the vision that it's casting. We have 3 more passages in the prophets, so we're going to go through them kind of quickly and be able to wrap up this section. See the post-exilic section.
Mm-hmm.
So the one I'll read
Yes,
is Amos 9:13-14. And it says, "The time is surely coming, says the Lord, when the one who plows shall catch up with the one who reaps, and the treader of grapes with the one who sows seed. The mountains shall drip with sweet wine, and in the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they shall make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant them in their land, and they shall never again be plucked up out of the land that I have given them, says the Lord your God." Which is the most optimistic section of the whole book of Amos. So optimistic that some people think maybe it was a later edition.
Yeah,
There's
definitely is out of place.
Doesn't
There's
sound
no
like
way
it.
Amos could be this happy. He's been so grumpy for 8 chapters. But, he's thinking again of, this is an 8th century text, and he's thinking of there's an impending judgment, which is going to be realized with the coming of Assyria and later Babylon. And, there's this anticipation of a day after God's judgment. And it's a day that's very earthy, and it's very hilly and vineyardy and planty, right?
Planting.
So another agricultural vision of salvation, showing that that's really important to God.
All right, we move to the post-exilic period, specifically Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6. And the context of this quickly is there's some confession, there's relaying what's gone on in their history. But Ezra begins his prayer with this statement in 9, verse 6. Ezra said, "You are the Lord, you alone. You've made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is in it, the seas and all that is in them. To all of them you give life, and the host of heaven worships you." And it's just a reaffirmation or an affirmation. It's one of them that God's the author of life. God's the author of all that is good and created. And to him it goes all the glory. And so doesn't matter what we come across, God is the one who's made it. And I think it's important to start, prayers that way. Recognition of who God is and what God has done. I try to do that as often as possible when I'm praying. Just a reminder, like, this is who I'm praying to.
Right.
And I mean, and then he goes and he relates the history of Israel to that point, which you don't do that every time you pray. But again,
Take a long time.
it's this prayer for these post-exilic people of, this is the God we're talking about.
Right
This is
on.
the God who has expectations of you. He's the creator, the redeemer, the restorer, and never forget that.
Yeah. What do you think of this language of the highest heavens? Because you add this spectrum of the highest heavens to earth.
Yeah.
What is the highest heavens? What does that imply?
Well, I think it goes back to, we talked about this at some point, maybe the heaven series, about heaven in the Bible means different things. It can mean the sky, it can mean above the sky, the stars, it can mean the actual dwelling place of God. I think for me, it's like from east to west, from top to bottom. I think is what he's saying. That as far as you can expand, which probably the celestial world, the divine world, is the highest heaven, but all the way down, that's God's.
Yeah. And I think you were looking confusing before because now we're entering the post-exilic period. Probably
Yes.
that Isaiah 66 passage
Right.
also belongs in this section.
It's fine.
So we can relocate that mentally.
Yeah,
There you
sure.
go. No problem.
I'm just confused and skipping passages. It's fine.
It's Saturday. It's messing us all up.
Yeah.
Last passage we want to look at is from Zechariah, another post-exilic prophet. Zechariah chapter 14, verses 6 through 10. Prophet writes, on that day there shall not be either cold or frost, and there shall be continuous day. It is known to the Lord. Not day and not night, for at evening time there shall be light. On that day living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea and half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. And the Lord will become king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one, and his name one. The whole land shall be turned into a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem shall remain aloft in its place. But Jerusalem shall remain aloft on its site from the gate of Benjamin to the place of the former gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses.
This is a very timely passage considering there were snowflakes in the air today.
For real. Exactly.
On that day, there will be no cold or frost. Yeah, there shouldn't be in April.
I know. I
It's
mean,
fine.
I'm
I'm not
wearing a
bitter.
heavier jacket today,
Not
so
bitter about it.
I'm kind of mad about that. But there are a number of things that stand out. One of the things is it does kind of echo a little bit the Ezekiel passage about water flowing out, but going to the east and the west, and probably symbolizing not just water that makes things grow, but symbolizing God's blessedness that affects all of creation. As we said, the plants, the animals, and the people. And the light imagery. It's like it's never going to be dark again. Just constant light. Light is great. It helps things to grow. It helps us to see where we're going. There are New Testament passages it makes me think of that maybe we can talk about in a later episode.
Yeah. And we could have added verse 11, kind of wraps up by saying, and this is talking about Jerusalem, this restored Jerusalem, and it shall be inhabited, for never again shall it be doomed to destruction. Jerusalem shall abide in security. And so, I think what's important about this passage is we've had several different witnesses testify to the same thing. The hope that Israel has for the future restoration is an earthly hope.
Yeah.
And Jerusalem is a part of it, never to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Right? That's just part of the Israelite vision is when God is done bringing his kingdom in its fullness, this is never going to be destroyed again. It's a fulfillment of that promise after the flood, right? God has hope for this earthly sphere and life in it. And for his people, Jerusalem is the symbol of that hope, and its well-being is the world's well-being.
Yeah.
So those are the prophets.
Yeah.
I mean, what we didn't find is a neglectful view of creation.
Right.
We found images of future desolation of the earth, but they're right alongside these kinds of passages that talk about never again will there be desolation on the earth. So which is it? They seem to be in tension, but if, either one's metaphorical or the other one is, but they can't both be literal.
Yeah, it's almost like the devastation is because of humans and their sin. The restoration and is because of God.
Right.
And so I think the implication is, so stop being terrible and ruining God's good planet.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Because he's not done with it.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us in this Saturday episode of the After Class podcast. After Class because
The best conversations happen
After class.
Thank you again for listening to the Afterclass Podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio production is provided by Drew Nyquist, and social media is managed by Darren Harris.